it was very evident once we saw this, like, this is going to get nominated for a few
Yes.
Oscars. I didn't expect this many, though. 13 Oscars as
Woo!
far as the nominations go. Hello, friends. I'm Anderson Marchak,
And I'm Ricardo Segarra.
and we are the Panel Bros. Welcome to the panel.
Welcome to the panel. Yeah.
Well, here we are.
Yes, sir.
All right. Our last episode focused
Mhm.
on Barbie, one of the
Yep.
most talked about and critically acclaimed movies of 2023. And well, we can't talk about Barbie without talking about the other movie, which we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And it was directed by Christopher Nolan.
Oh,
In
yeah.
Nolan We Trust.
In Nolan we trust, baby.
And it was released July 23rd of 2023, the same weekend as Barbie.
Mhm.
Today, the Panel Bros are going to be doing a breakdown for Oppenheimer.
Bro.
Yeah.
This is I've only seen this movie twice. This was the second time I got to see it. One time we saw it together in IMAX,
Right.
which was just an unbelievable experience, man. This is one of those movies that you will remember that experience. For example, when I saw Jurassic Park for the first time in theater, that's an experience I will never forget. This is one of those experiences that it catapulted the movie even more so because of that theatrical experience. And I remember that theater was packed, man. Like, it was wall to wall, and you could feel everything in the theater. You could feel everyone else, hanging on every word. So this man, it's being able to see it again for the second time and really watch it again. God, man, I was like, I can't wait to talk about this, because this for a movie that's all about just conversation dialogue, it just feels so epic.
Yeah, I saw it once in theaters with you, opening
Mhm.
weekend, for IMAX, and then I saw a traditional movie theater viewing a couple months later, and then for our podcast, I watched a home viewing. So this was
Mhm.
my third time watching it. So I saw it 3 different ways: IMAX, traditional theater, and then home viewing. And yeah, it the recency bias doesn't go away. Like,
No.
it wasn't recency bias because I still enjoyed it each time. So
Yep.
we'll get into this about how we felt when we watched it, and
Mhm.
just the conversations that started with Oppenheimer as the months passed and such. So,
Yeah.
and obviously we touched on Barbenheimer a little bit during our Barbie breakdown, so we got to talk about Barbenheimer a little bit with our Oppenheimer breakdown as well. So,
Yeah.
alrighty, so it is 1926. We have 22-year-old doctoral student J. Robert Oppenheimer, played by Cillian Murphy, and he is grappling with anxiety and homesickness while studying experimental physics under Patrick Blackett at the Cavendish Laboratory in the University of Cambridge.
Mhm.
And upset with Blackett's attitude, Oppenheimer leaves him a poisoned apple, but later retrieves it. So, all right, we're not going to gloss over this. We're just going to randomly say that it was well, first of all, it was very nonchalant. He took
Yeah.
some cyanide in a syringe and injected it into it
Yeah.
because the teacher was bullying him a little bit because he wanted to go see the special speaker, but he said, "Oh, you got to clean up." And
Yeah.
obviously this has been ongoing. So I'm just gonna put cyanide in this apple here.
Bro, it
And
was
and then he grabs the apple the following day. He remembers it, and he
Mhm.
goes to grab the apple, but it was out of the hand of the special speaker because he had left it there for the teacher. But then he realized, like, oh no, I don't want him to die. And it's just like, so
Yeah.
Oppenheimer, attempted murderer? What's going on here?
Like, it was so crazy because obviously, as you mentioned, like, you can tell by the way the scene plays out that this is an ongoing thing, that he feels he's being mistreated, and he's really adamant about going to this lecture. And his professor's like, "Nope, you have to stay here." "No, not you, Oppenheimer." Like, very just like, "Of course not you. You stay here and you continue to work on this and fix this and clean up this mess." And he's just very upset, to the point that when he injected that apple, I was like, "Oh my God." I was like, wait a minute. Like you mentioned, I was like, is this attempted murder? Like, what's happening?
Right.
But as you mentioned, the special speaker goes to grab the apple, and like there's this scene of just like tension. Like, he's looking at the apple, and you can see in his eyes, he's trying so hard to just be like, don't eat the apple, don't eat the apple. And luckily, right before he takes a bite, he grabs it and he just like, wormhole, and just throws it away. Like there was a
Right.
wormhole in it. It's not good to eat. And like I was like, oh wow, like you said, like it's such a significant thing. I was like, yo, he thought about poisoning that guy. You know what I mean?
Right. And I just chalk this up to a creative liberty. You know,
Yeah,
it's a biopic, but
yeah,
all these other things, you got to fill in the gaps somehow. So obviously Nolan being a little sneaky, it's like I'll just throw this little thing here in the beginning.
mhm,
Um, yeah, it was a Niels Bohr. He's a visiting scientist played by Kenneth
mhm,
Branagh,
yes,
and he advises Oppenheimer to study theoretical physics at the University of Göttingen instead.
mhm,
So Oppenheimer completes his PhD there and meets fellow scientist Isidor Isaac Rabi. And they later meet theoretical physicist Werner Heisenberg in Switzerland.
mhm,
And wanting to expand quantum physics research in the United States, Oppenheimer begins teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, and the California Institute of Technology. He marries Catherine Kitty Puning, a biologist and ex-communist,
yeah,
and has an intermittent affair with Jean Tatlock, a troubled communist who later apparently commits suicide. So
mhm.
we're going to talk a little bit about this thing with his romance
Oh yeah,
situation.
oh yeah,
So Nolan is deliberately focusing on Oppenheimer's romances with these two women. On one hand, he's seeing one, that's Jean,
mhm,
and the other is his wife, which actually started out as an affair because
yeah,
Kitty was married to somebody, and while he's seeing Jean, he pursues Kitty as well,
yeah,
and but it in a way, it's almost like I don't like the term steal or woo, but he deliberately pursues this thing with Kitty, knowing she's a married woman, and
yes,
she doesn't fight it because she made a statement that it's not what it was anymore, and I think this might have been her second or third marriage, something like that,
mhm.
um, but because he is who he continues to see Jean even after he marries Kitty.
Yeah. Listen,
So,
they
already
they
it's yeah, a little bit of drama already.
yeah, they like again, this is not a perfect individual by any
Right,
standards. He's having an affair with a married woman, and she gets pregnant in the process,
right,
and during their affair, and he's like, and he tells Jean, he goes, he's pretty much breaking it off with Jean, and and she's like, "Oh, like, so what happens?" He goes, "Well, I talked to her husband. They're getting a divorce. We're gonna be able to get married before she starts showing." And Jean is just like, "Wow, this and that," and she's crying, and she mentions how like, "Oh, this is a door closing," and he's like, "No, it's not." And it's just like it shows you that mentality still, where like you mentioned, he's still keeping that door kind of open, with her by saying like, no, the door's not entirely closed, and it's like, oh, what are you saying, man? Like, what are you saying?
right. Right, and
It's just unfortunate.
the nature of him and Jean's relationship, it wasn't exactly a quote unquote serious relationship
No,
because it was kind of like they saw each other when they could.
hmm
She hated when he brought her flowers,
yes,
and she just kept wanting to end it. And he's like, "Well, why do you still call?" And she's like, "Well, don't pick up." You
yeah. I remember us having that conversation. I think in the theater, you were looking at me like, oh God, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah, yeah,
it was like, well, then why do you do this? Well, don't pick up the phone. It's like, well, wait a minute, then don't call him, and it
right,
just,
right.
yeah. And she did
So
hate the idea of flowers because she brings it up there. She goes, well, at least he didn't bring me flowers. You know what I mean?
right,
It's,
right,
it's a very interesting dynamic of a relationship, if you call it that.
but they kept finding each other, obviously,
Mhm,
and so, unfortunately, he gets mixed up with Kitty to the
mhm.
point of the pregnancy and then marriage, um, and so let's move on over to, just for a little bit here, we have to talk about the graphic nature of some of these scenes here with
Oh yeah,
Jean.
yeah.
So we have Kitty, played by Emily Blunt,
hmm
and then we have Jean, played by your girl, Florence Pugh, Flo.
Yeah,
And Florence Pugh just goes for it
yeah.
with these scenes, just very hard to do as an actor. And to my understanding, I don't believe Nolan's ever had deliberate and blatant nudity in any of his movies.
I can't recall
Right.
at
Even
all.
his rated R movies.
Mm-mm.
And also on top of that, I don't believe he's had graphic sex scenes either. That's just not
Mhm,
a thing that he's done. There was one like assault scene
mhm.
in Memento, but it's not really
Yeah,
meant to be like a sex scene, so to speak, obviously.
yeah.
So this is the first time he's ever done this. And you and I have had this discussion about sex scenes in general. We don't
Mhm.
have to go too far. And one thing I liked about Nolan is he always just faded to black. You know,
Yeah,
either
yeah,
faded to black or he
yeah.
hinted at it that something may or may not have happened between the characters. He does his hard cut, and then you just
Mhm.
see the characters next to each other, you know. So,
Yeah,
um, but he chose to be deliberate in showing well, first of all, nudity between Florence Pugh and Cillian Murphy, and
yes.
then graphic sex scenes between them as well. And there's some where they're together alone,
Mhm.
but the one everyone's going to talk about
Yup.
is where he's admitting to the affair in front of his wife in the hearing in the room.
Yes.
And not that the wife didn't know about it, but the fact that he had to recall it in front of her, in front of all these
Yes.
people. So, through a dream sequence, she is imagining
Yeah.
Jean, being intimate with her husband right there in
Mhm.
front of her while Jean is
Yeah.
staring at her.
Yes.
Um, so this is a lot to unpack here. First of all, not only did Nolan go for nudity and graphic sex scenes, he went for disturbing imagery on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what was your reaction to that, Ricardo? Because for me, it was a little uncomfortable. you
Yeah,
know,
I'll be honest with you. For a couple of reasons. One, because as you mentioned, this is not something we've seen Nolan do in prior films. We've never really seen him go this far when it comes to sexual nature in a film. So to see it, it was like, whoa, like it is very shocking, especially because of the way the scene is laid out, right? Killian's character Oppenheimer is being interviewed in a room full of people. So within the context of the scene, this is happening in this room full of people. So like it's like whoa, like it's jarring to a degree. And then you
right?
remind yourself it's not actually happening, but the visual is there. But I also think that I know I've heard both sides of the argument. I've heard some people go like, oh, like it was a great addition to the scene for the context. And I've heard other people say, oh, it was too much. They were like, why would he put that in the movie? For me, I understood it because countless times I've heard, whether it's through TV, film, or even in real life, is that when there is whether it's adultery, whether it's just cheating in general, our minds can't help but sometimes think of the worst case scenario. You can't help it. And right now, his wife is sitting there having to hear him recall it and actually talk about it. And her mind is doing what a lot of us would do, where we can't help but imagine it happening
Right.
right in front of us. And that happens a lot. So within the context of the characters in the story, it makes total sense. Why wouldn't she see that? Why wouldn't her mind wander as the man that she's in love with, the father of her children, is telling this story of the affairs that he's had? She can't help that. And there's a really good moment where they have Jean's character make eye contact with her.
Right.
And again, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable
Right.
because this is her mind, this is her vision of everything, and she's actually making contact, like eye contact with the quote unquote, daydream sequence that she's seeing. We're supposed to feel uncomfortable. We're supposed to feel essentially what she feels. And I think because of that, it works. Again, I've heard the argument, people go, oh, I think it was too far. Like it was done. And I'm like, but it makes sense for the character because like again, people can't help but think that. God forbid, like if if I was in a situation where my significant other cheated on me, my brain would go there. I'm like, oh my
Right.
god, I just see him touching you. I see this, I see that. You know what I mean? So in context, I think it makes sense. It's just very jarring for a
Right.
couple reasons.
Right. And I don't know if this was the reason or not. They had 2 separate scenes, you know?
Hmm.
So, maybe it was like, well, we'll have this less severe scene to just let you guys know that this is the nature of their relationship before
Yeah,
I show you this one scene where I have this uncomfortable sequence planned, you
yeah,
know? So, maybe the one scene was kind of like to set up the nature of the relationship that they,
hmm,
that's the type of relationship they have, the attraction they have to one another. Because, um, actually, it might have been the same night they met, something like that.
yeah,
So it was kind of like, oh, they hit it off immediately, but
hmm,
then we come back to it again, but now it's right in front of everybody.
yeah. I
So
think. I think what works for it too is that the way we as an audience, and I won't drag on this too long. I think we as an audience, the way we saw two people in a sexual scene, how we interpreted those scenes are entirely different.
Right.
Meaning, when we see him and Gene, Oppenheimer and Gene the first time, we're kind of just absorbing the scene. Like we're not turned off by it. We're not like, oh God, uncomfortable. We're kind of like, okay, this is a fling. They're being intimate with
Right.
one another. It is what it is. But the next time we see them together, it's really uncomfortable. And now what we saw before as just two people having a fling of being together, we're now seeing something as very uncomfortable and wrong. And I love that dynamic between how we see it two different times.
Right. And I'll just leave it at this is man, I don't want to get too personal here. Um uh, Cheating is not a nice thing.
No.
And you and I both have very strong feelings about cheating,
Yes.
which we're not going to get into here.
Yes.
We want to just put that out there. So, when this happens to somebody, it's very hurtful.
Hmm.
And even though Kitty knew about it, Nolan wanted to show us how much pain she was going through and how much
Yeah.
it caused her pain to have to live through it again. Because before, I think she even says something, like it's like, you knew about it, Kitty. Why are you upset? It's like, yeah, but now you're airing it out for everybody to hear. It was
Yep.
embarrassing for me. So,
Yeah.
alrighty. And and then eventually, it leads to finding out that Jean died. And
Yeah.
then it's, we'll come back to this again, but it's up in the air how she died.
Hmm.
So, um, nuclear fission is discovered in 1938, and Oppenheimer realizes it could be weaponized. So, in 1942, during World War II, U.S. Army Colonel Leslie Groves, played by Matt Damon, recruits Oppenheimer as director of the Manhattan Project to develop an atomic bomb.
Yeah.
Oppenheimer fears the German nuclear research program, led by Heisenberg, might yield a fission bomb for the Nazis.
Hmm.
So he's thinking, well, if you want me to do this, I'm scared they might do it before us
Yeah.
because he knows Heisenberg.
Hmm.
So he assembles a team consisting of Robbie, Hans Beth, and Edward Teller at the Los Alamos laboratory, and also collaborates with scientists Enrico Fermi, Leo Szilard, and David L. Hill at the University of Chicago. So two teams.
Hmm.
Um, Teller's calculations, Teller, I want to say that that's Safety, if I'm
Okay.
not mistaken. Yeah. Reveals an atomic detonation could trigger a catastrophic chain reaction
Yes.
that ignites the atmosphere. So, um, what we're talking about here is the end of the world. It could
Yeah.
blow up the entire world. Um,
Yeah.
and when Oppenheimer tries to explain this to Matt Damon's character, it's like, how about, are you certain of this? And he's like, 90, 99. I think he said like a number, and he's like,
Yeah.
and well, what do you want? How about 100% certainty that the entire world's not going to end?
Yeah. When his character does these calculations and you start seeing them go, well, that can't be true, like where you get his information, and they're putting it together and you're like, wait a minute. And like the idea that they could have caused a chain reaction that would not stop, that would completely engulf the planet, is horrifying. And they were going to push through. And as you mentioned, Matt Damon's character is very much like, he's trying to make sense of it. He's like, well, wait a minute. You're saying that we could essentially destroy the world. And he's like, yeah, but in all the tests that we've done, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. The percentage is very low. And he goes, low? Like, what do you mean low? And he goes, well, what do you want? He goes, I'd like to have zero, please. And he was like,
Right.
well, we'll find out. And it's like, what?
Right.
What? Horrifying.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for correcting me on that. I did the reverse, 99 to 100. He wanted a
Oh
0%
yeah.
chance. Yeah.
Because he was like, I want zero. He was like, I
Yeah. So
remember
it was like
because
a one.
he was
It was like a
he
few
was like, oh,
percent.
yeah. He
A
was
few
like, it's
percent.
low. It's
Yeah.
low. And he was like, excuse,
Yeah.
what do you want? He goes, I want zero. Like,
Right.
give me zero. And it's like, I can't give you that, man. It's low.
So after consulting with the Albert Einstein, who makes some selective
Yes.
appearances in this movie, which we're going to talk about that in a little bit here.
Mhm.
Oppenheimer concludes the chances are acceptably low. So,
Yeah.
the conversation we mentioned here. Teller attempts to leave the project after his proposal to construct a hydrogen bomb is rejected, but
Mhm.
Oppenheimer convinces him to stay. So, this eventually leads to the Trinity Test. And if successful, what would be the next step of actually using the bomb itself? So, we have Stimson, the Secretary of War. He has this conversation with this room full of people in which Oppenheimer is there and Groves is there as well. And it's just very nonchalant and cold, talking about where in Japan they can drop it.
Mhm.
And he makes it a point to say, well, let's just try to narrow it down to two of these places, um, but definitely not Kyoto because that's where my wife and I honeymooned.
Yes.
And it was just like, wow, we're talking about people dying here, and you
Yeah.
care about blowing up a place that you honeymooned,
Yes.
and he tries to humanize it by saying, "Oh, it's such a beautiful city," like
Yes.
definitely meant to be a shocking moment.
It was. And again, like the movie relies majority on dialogue. And it was awesome watching this in the theater and hearing people within the theater hang on these words. Because when he said that, you could feel it. You could feel it amongst the people there of just like, ugh, like how disgusting.
Right.
Like we're talking about human lives. And he's like, well, don't worry about that spot because that's where we honeymoon. And it's just like, what? Like it's so off-putting. It makes you kind of sick to your stomach a little bit. And like you mentioned, it's meant to be shocking, and it is. And there's a sadness because there's a realness to that. There's a realness to that type of behavior and that type of language, especially in scenarios like that.
So after Germany's surrender in 1945, some project scientists questioned the bomb's relevance. Oppenheimer believes it would end the ongoing Pacific War and save Allied lives.
Mhm.
So the Trinity test is successful, and we see the detonation. Everything's building up to this. Throughout the movie, we hear a noise, and we don't know what that noise is until later on in the
Yeah.
movie. And we hear it throughout, but then we hear it again during the Trinity test. And you're just on the edge of your seat, especially if you went to see it in the movie theater. Like, how is
Yeah.
this going to turn out? And it's framed as one of the biggest moments in the movie, if not the biggest moment in the movie.
Mhm.
And um, each and every actor has their own reaction to when they actually detonate, and they make it look like it's not going to happen with the rain and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
these other factors are coming in. It's like, no, it's happening tonight. And eventually, there's no boom initially because it's so far away,
Mhm.
because it takes time for sound to travel.
Sound the reach. Yep.
And then you hear this. Well, first of all, it's silent,
Very.
and you see just the actors. You hear people breathing. That's it. And then you hear this just big boom, and then they show the reaction of each actress again once you hear the boom. Um, this was an anxiety filled moment for me the first time I saw it.
Yes,
And
it was.
then it was almost like when the boom went off, it was like, okay, we got it over with now, you know?
Yeah, like you were almost holding your breath. And Nolan does this really well. A majority of the movie feels like you're racing a clock because you mentioned there's this sound throughout the movie, and you're not entirely sure what this sound is, and we're getting there, and it's building. So like the tension, the sound design, the score, the entire movie is building, and it's building, and it's building, and we have this moment, and you think they're gonna get rained down. Like, no, we're doing it. 5, I think 5 or 5:30, 5 or 5:30. I forget what it was, but it was like 5. We're going at 5. We're going at 5. We're doing this. Oh, what happens with the rain? Is the wind going to move it there? Will we have evacuation things set up? Like we're building and we're building. And when this thing goes off, I remember because the sound design was amazing in IMAX. I'm waiting for the loudest explosion. Like I'm just waiting.
Yeah.
And then you see it, and then you remember, oh, wait, it takes a minute for time for sound to travel. And it's just silent. And you hear it, and you just get this bright light, and you're waiting for it. And like you said, there's anxiety. Like I remember feeling like I was holding my breath. and then it hits, and it was so loud in the theater, and I absolutely loved it. And I love that you get to take that minute and kind of like really appreciate everybody's reaction to it. You're seeing everybody's reaction, whether they're in a car, whether they're in the bunker, whether they're outside, whether they're laying down. Like, you're getting everyone's reaction, no matter where they are, to this crazy, crazy, crazy explosion. And it's building to this moment. And like you said, it's probably like the biggest impactful, visual in the movie and whatnot, and it lands. The technical application setting this up was perfect, in my opinion.
So President Harry S. Truman, played by Gary Oldman. It's a surprise cameo that
I had no idea.
we don't know about until it happens. Yeah. He orders the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, resulting in Japan's surrender. Though publicly praised, Oppenheimer's haunted by the mass destruction and fatalities.
Mhm.
So, two things here. One, we don't see it. Nolan made it a point not to show the detonation and all of the destruction. But he gives us a glimpse where we finally see Oppenheimer addressing a crowd, and we find out that noise you hear is people stomping their feet waiting for Oppenheimer to enter in. It almost sounded like marching. It sounded like a drum roll. Like, we couldn't figure out what that sound was the entire movie. And then we realize it's this one moment of Oppenheimer addressing this crowd, because it signified that, we dropped it and then Japan surrendered. But as he's addressing the crowd, you start seeing it almost like the bomb went off. You see people laughing and clapping, but you see like their faces deteriorating because of the bomb. He stepped onto a body just made of ash. He walked past people crying. You see somebody vomiting because of the after effects of dealing with the radiation and everything like that.
Yep.
So many different things that happened to that country, both during and after its detonation. This was the scariest moment in the entire movie, and it qualifies as a horror sequence. And this and other moments in the movie have people saying that Oppenheimer's a low-key horror movie because of the sequences. So for me, as I watched this moment, and trust me, Nolan could have went there. He could have been very graphic with this moment if he wanted to be, but he deliberately chose not to show the bomb going off because first of all, it's a very sensitive subject, even to this day. So, he's just like, no, I'm not going to show it, but I'm going to show you in the mind of Oppenheimer what he saw happening. And then it kind of made it interesting there. So for me, I thought it was well done. At this moment, we already saw the test, so maybe we didn't really need to see the real thing happen. The thrill seeker in me wanted to see it going off, maybe not the destruction, but at least seeing it going off. But we didn't get it, and it's just kind of like, you know what? Okay, so we're seeing what's happening in the mind of Oppenheimer. So, what was your reaction, Ricardo, to just Nolan not showing it, happening in Japan, and then also Oppenheimer's nightmare sequence here, so to speak?
It was interesting because prior to the release, we weren't, at least I wasn't aware that we weren't going to see it. I thought we were going to see it. I thought we were going to see the bombs drop. I didn't think we were going to get too visual. I figured we would see the bombs drop from very far, and that would be the effect that we see, but we didn't even see it. And Nolan has always done a really good job when he wants to do a less is more approach. When he wants to do that, he does a really good job. And this was one of those moments. And the scene itself, like you said, it feels like a horror movie. It's very haunting because as he's coming out and you see the people and they're celebrating the dropping of these bombs, and hundreds of thousands of people losing their lives, and they're celebrating. And that sound that we hear is them stomping their feet, and they're chanting and they're cheering, and hearing him. Well, actually seeing him and seeing how he's absorbing this, you can see the anxiety taking over, and he's trying so hard to stay locked into what he's supposed to do. Like, yeah, I bet you they didn't like it, and I wish we could have dropped it on the Nazis and this and that. And everybody's cheering, yeah, but deep down inside, he's having like an anxiety attack. You start to see the screen shake, which is a great visual representation of just being not in control of the environment around you. And the very first scene, you see a woman, and when you start to see her face deteriorate, and what I love about Nolan is Nolan's really good with practical effects, that it's just actual like makeup, but it looks like skin flapping in wind, and it just looks awful. And you're seeing what he's seeing, and he sees a woman laughing. He turns away, and when he looks back, she's crying. You have the body of Ash that he steps on, really uncomfortable, because like initially when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, it looks like a smaller body. Like that doesn't look like a full grown adult. And I was like the image of just even a child or something, like it was very dark and very heavy. And then he sees a couple kissing and making out, and then he turns back, and now they're crying and holding each other, getting ready for the blast. The man outside sick. The whole scene is very haunting for a couple of reasons. One, visually on what he's seeing, but also of the representation of the scene itself, where again, these people are celebrating. Like these people are celebrating, they're waving their flags, and it's like a scary movie, man, because you know the feeling is not, it's not being celebrated. Like Oppenheimer's not celebrating this. He's not happy about this. So we're trying to relate to Oppenheimer's emotion in the scene. And it's like, imagine you being so uncomfortable, anxiety's crushing you right now. You feel it. And everyone around you is smiling and happy that this happened. You're like, this isn't right. Like, this isn't right. It's very well done, but it feels very haunting. He has no control over the environment. He has no control of anything around him, but he feels all the weight of that guilt of knowing what these weapons of mass destruction were being used for. And it's just like, it's really hard for him to take in. But again, Nolan does a great job giving us that horror feel. It's, in my opinion, it's the most haunting scene of the movie, where I just felt like really scared. I was like, dude, this is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and to your point with the less is more approach, we've seen bombs go off in past movies.
Yeah.
We've seen, I don't want to say, I don't want to get flagged here, by getting too graphic, but we've seen nukes go off. We've seen fire engulf people. The dream sequence in Terminator 2 Judgment Day comes to mind.
Yeah, we've seen it.
I think Sarah Connor is there when Judgment Day happens. It's her, right? And then the
Yes.
fire, and then you see the skeleton screaming.
Yep.
Well, you see her screaming, and then the skeleton, and then the fire engulfs, and
Yep.
it's like it's Judgment Day. So we've seen those visuals before, and so Nolan says, you know what? I'm not going to show you that because you've seen this before in many other movies. I'm going to give you something else. I'm going to give you a nightmare sequence of what somebody's imagining it's like, and it worked, obviously. So
yeah, and I will say this before we move on from the scene. I think he made a good choice, because if he had shown it, because like as you mentioned, Terminator 2 is a perfect example. It's very visual. If he would have taken that route, there's a big possibility that the imagery could have been so haunting, it could have been really hard for people to get back out of that. Because to see something that heinous and that visual and grotesque, it's hard to come back. And again, our whole ride is meant to be with Oppenheimer. That's our ride. That's the guy we're following. We're following his emotion. We're following his mental capacity. He's who we are sticking with. And if we had seen something as visual as like a T2 representation of these bombs going off, the next 10 minutes probably would have been really hard to shake that imagery. And for some people, probably wouldn't have been able to shake it long after the movie, because they probably be like, oh man, all I could keep thinking about was that one scene when they dropped the bombs, And he doesn't want you to just focus on that. He wants you to focus a lot on how Oppenheimer feels and what he thinks should be done moving forward. So I think it was a very wise choice that he didn't show it.
So after expressing his personal guilt to Truman, the president berates Oppenheimer and dismisses his urging to cease further atomic development. So,
Yep.
there aren't too many good guys in this movie, and
No.
Nolan didn't make the president look like a good guy either.
No.
Once again, probably some creative liberties here,
Mhm.
but Oppenheimer is trying to show just his remorse, and the president just echoes what everybody else is telling him is, they're not cursing your name right now. They're cursing my name because I gave the okay.
Mhm.
They're cursing the names of the people that actually dropped it. They're not cursing the person that created it. This is a false sense of humility, a false sense of you making this, you're the most famous man in the world right now, and
Mhm.
you can't even enjoy it,
Yep.
because of the guilt that you have. And so um that's as far as that at that moment. And I think he made the cover of Time. So
Yes.
he's looking at it before and this is considered an honor in most
Mhm.
circles to meet the president. And all he's thinking about the fact is, crap, I can't believe what I've done, you know?
Yeah. And Truman calls him a crybaby. He says, "Don't
That's
bring that crybaby back in here."
right.
And and Truman isn't the only person to believe this. They think Oppenheimer is just basically trying to make it about himself.
Right.
Because he's like, "You think they care who made it? They don't care who made it. They care who dropped it." He's like, "They're not talking about you." And there's this idea that, him and Strauss, they believe that Oppenheimer is just like, I'm the guy. I mean, that's not it at all. Like, Oppenheimer truly believes like we shouldn't be doing this. But to them, they think he's trying to be a martyr or martyr himself,
Right.
if you will. And
Correct.
they're like, no, don't worry. And when he says, "Don't bring that crybaby in here," it's like, good God, man.
Right.
Like,
Rough.
yeah.
As an advisor to the United States Atomic Energy Commission, Oppenheimer's stance generates controversy, while Teller's hydrogen bomb receives renewed interest amidst the burgeoning Cold War. AEC Chairman Louis Strauss, played by Robert Downey Jr., resents Oppenheimer for publicly dismissing his concerns about exporting radioisotopes and for recommending negotiations with the Soviet Union after they successfully detonated their own bomb.
Mhm.
He also believes that Oppenheimer denigrated him during a conversation Oppenheimer had with Einstein in 1947. And we will
Yep.
come back to this conversation towards the end here. In 1954, wanting to eliminate Oppenheimer's political influence, Strauss secretly orchestrates a private security hearing before a personnel security board concerning Oppenheimer's Q clearance. So early in the movie, we see Strauss um, as an ally to Oppenheimer.
Mhm.
And then eventually it starts devolving into, oh no, he's his enemy,
Yeah.
and it's an ongoing, what's the motive for this? Why is he doing this? And it becomes clear that the hearing has a predetermined outcome. So they're already going to find him guilty,
Oh yeah.
or that
Yeah.
not guilty, but we're not going to renew your clearance, which you need to continue being involved with all of these talks and opportunities and such. Oppenheimer's past communist ties are exploited, which include Gene and the people he associated with, and accusing Kitty of being a communist as well.
Yep.
And Groves and the other associates' testimony is twisted against him. So even the people coming to his defense, they twist it every single time
Yep.
to for their agenda. Teller testifies that he lacks confidence in Oppenheimer and recommends revocation. This is Safdie's character, somebody that Oppenheimer considered a friend.
Yes.
And he shook his hand, and Kitty curses. She said, "You shook his hand? I would have
She's
spat.
mad,
I
man.
would have spat in his face. This is a man you consider to be a friend, and he did
Yep.
this to you." The board revokes Oppenheimer's clearance, damaging his public image and limiting his influence on nuclear policy. So it wasn't just opportunities, it wasn't just speaking, it was his influence on the policy of weapons of mass destruction. The man that created the atomic bomb should have a say on these policies moving forward. But now they're like, no, we don't want you around anymore at all.
Yeah.
In 1959, during Strauss's Senate confirmation hearing for Secretary of Commerce, Hill testifies about Strauss's personal motives in engineering Oppenheimer's downfall, resulting his nomination being voted down.
Yep.
Hill is played by Rami Malek,
This scene,
and
bro.
he doesn't speak
No.
the entire movie. We just see Rami Malek, just a very reserved performance. He just glasses, nods, listens. What a great lesson and how important it is to listen properly, because
Yeah.
that's all Rami Malek does in the entire movie. He just listens the entire movie and reacts the entire movie. But then he comes in, and just when we think that Oppenheimer has no hope at all, or no comeuppance to the people that are doing this to him, Hill exposes Strauss as the main conspirator against Oppenheimer. And you could see Strauss just turn white as a ghost because he can't
Yep.
believe he got found out. It was probably one of the biggest mic drop moments in the entire movie.
Yes.
And you feel so satisfied when you see Hill expose Strauss.
There's two big moments. One is with Kitty. The
Right.
other one is with David Hill. Because I remember, and at one point, I was like, "Listen, I understand that every actor on the planet wants to work with Nolan." I was like, "Rami Malek really doesn't have any dialogue." I was like, "This." I was like, "Wow!" Like he's just listening. And this moment in the movie, I remember like people. You could feel
Yeah.
people completely hanging on every word that he had to say and just going like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like you could feel that internal feeling, everybody going, yeah, because like he exposes Strauss and RDJ's performance, see him go white as a ghost, and he's listening to this happen. And we have David now, right when we thought all hope was lost. David Hill says what he needs to say. He talks about the personal bias, the personal attacks from Strauss against Oppenheimer, the manipulation against the people in the interviews, everything else. It was stacked. Like he drops it, man. And like you said, it's a mic drop. And I remember being in the theater thinking like, usually in another movie, I would have to watch something actually happen in terms of physicality, whether a fight, the good guy finally slays the bad guy. And here we have just a man sitting in a courtroom in a microphone and just basically telling the truth. And I remember just getting so hype. I was just like, because again, Nolan does a really good job of building. We're building and we're building, and we build to this one scene, and David Hill just comes through, man. He comes through in clutch, and it is awesome to see happen.
So you did mention Kitty. She has
Yeah.
the other mic drop moment. Her
Yes.
testimony is amazing. She owned them with their tactics. They're trying to badger her about the communist card and her status as a communist. She's just like, oh, it's 14, 15 years, 16. Oh, sorry, it was 18 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're trying to tell me it wasn't that long ago. We're talking about almost 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and you're trying to
Yep.
bring this up to me. Um, we have Roger Robb, the character here.
Mhm.
Like, he's the one tasked with like doing this. So once again, predetermined outcomes. So he's just hired to just go after everybody that Oppenheimer knows and Oppenheimer himself. And
Yep.
then here comes his wife. That's just once again, she's been quiet this entire time in the background during the hearing itself, rather. And this is just a separate day altogether where she actually gets invited in to speak. And she not only owns Rob, she owns everybody in the room.
She
And
owns the entire room.
it's just wonderful. It's just
It
absolutely wonderful.
I remember feeling very nervous because the way it leads in, it's like, oh man, they're gonna get her. Like they're gonna trip her up. They're twisting everybody's words. This is not gonna go well. And she came to play. And I remember hearing people in the theater being like, yeah, you know what I mean? Because she was confident and she was hitting them back with information. And you could see it on her face. There's almost like this sort of grin on her face. Not too much, but it's there enough to the point where she's like, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. I'm not stupid. And like she plays, like you said, she plays everyone in the room. It's a great performance from Emily Blunt. And it's so awesome to see Kitty, who's had to go through all this, listen to everything her husband Oppenheimer had to talk about, see everyone turning, being manipulated, and she's still able to hold her own. It's such a great moment. It's definitely a clap moment for me. It was fantastic to watch it happen, her own everybody there.
So we get the buildup of Rob berating Oppenheimer about supporting the bombing of Japan.
Mhm.
And then we have the imagery like the room that they were in was going to explode. The
Yes.
shutter starts shaking. We see the lighting. We start seeing like, oh no, are they going to blow up too? Just like when he was
Mhm.
addressing the crowd. We hear the noise. We hear the stomping of the feet again. Um, and we're thinking, is this going to happen again? And it was just like when he was addressing the crowd. And also we get flashbacks to that moment as well, and it doesn't happen. It just goes,
Mm-mm.
it just gets
Yeah,
calm.
it goes very silent. It goes and it's done.
Yeah,
Uh, Again, Nolan did such a good job in this movie, really pointing out like that anxiety, that the feeling of being closed in, and the room gets very bright. It's a very bright white light, and he's just getting berated, and he's trying, and you hear the stomps again, the pa 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 pa, and everything's building, and you're like waiting, like you said, you're kind of waiting for this explosion. You're waiting for this thing to just blow the roof off, and it just goes,
right.
and it just goes silent, and you're like, whoa,
Yeah,
it's
and
really good.
you and I have said this to each other off the air. Jason Clarke plays a quote unquote bad guy a lot,
Mhm.
and he's very easy to hate in a lot of his roles, especially in this one, though. Like,
Yeah.
I hated this character the entire movie. So to see Kitty give it back to him at least a little bit, that was good for
Yep.
me,
Yeah.
and so I just wanted to touch on that a little bit there.
Easily.
So in 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson presents Oppenheimer with the Enrico Fermi Award as a gesture of political rehabilitation. He starts, you know, renewing his image, so to speak, after all these things have happened
Yeah.
to him. A flashback reveals Oppenheimer and Einstein's 1947 conversation, never mentioning Strauss.
Nope.
And towards the end, Strauss is um, uh, confident there. He's like, well, maybe they weren't talking about you. Maybe they're talking about something a little bit more important.
That was so good.
Yeah,
The back and forth that they have throughout the movie, it starts very civil, but as the movie progresses, his confidence starts to see a little bit more about who Strauss really is, and he starts giving it back with little digs here and there. You know what I mean? Like that one is a great one. For example, maybe but they probably even mentioned maybe they're talking about something more important, and it was just like, oh, like there's a lot of that. And again, that was another moment where people were riding on the dialogue, they were
right.
feeling it, and it was just like, oh, that was a really good dig. And then you could see Strauss kind of be like, what did you say? And then like they kind of keep the conversation going.
So Oppenheimer instead expressed his belief that they had indeed started a chain reaction, a nuclear arms race that would one day destroy the world.
Hmm.
And before I close out with the closing line here, I want to talk a little bit about Einstein, who is
Hmm.
used, and it's very deliberate whenever Einstein's on camera. Um, Well-known historical figure, a
Yes.
very distinct look. The online joke is that they resurrected Einstein to play
Yeah.
himself
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this movie because the actor looked just like him.
He was great.
And
He was
whenever
great.
he spoke, it was so deliberate and it was great too.
Hmm.
Um, I remember you and I giggled a little bit when the one cab drove away and Einstein is just there,
Yeah. It's
y- you
it's
know, ready to
it's
talk to Oppenheimer, but we finally get the reveal of that conversation, and it's once again Nolan just ends the movie on a scary note here.
very.
The conversation that they had with each other. Oppenheimer says, "When I came to you with those calculations, we thought we might start a chain reaction that would destroy the entire world." Einstein says, "I remember it well. What of it?" And Oppenheimer says, "I believe we did."
Yeah,
And we
dude.
get a little bit of more imagery, and that's our movie. So, initial thoughts, Ricardo, upon watching this. I know you and we talked a little bit afterward, and
Mhm.
for me, I believe the movie's 3 hours long,
Yes.
and it's just like, wow, there's so much to take in, and I was just so surprised of how intense and well done this movie was, and it's a movie of just people talking.
That's all it is.
Some things happen here and there, like, the test for the bomb to
Mhm.
go off, and um, you know, there's um there's moments here and there of showing other things, but most of it is the hearing. It's conversations between Oppenheimer and other people. Um, there's the dream sequence, the nightmare sequence. Okay, that's something else that happened, but most of this
Mhm.
is just conversations. But yet it was so interesting, and the actors just draw you in with how much energy they bring. So,
Yeah.
your initial thoughts, Ricardo?
I remember we had discussed the idea of many people watching Barbenheimer, Barbie the same day as Oppenheimer, and I remember saying I was so grateful that I didn't watch them on the same day. When Oppenheimer ended, I was I was just so pleased that I gave it its own day to really absorb it, because there's a lot to absorb. Um, when that movie ended, it's kind of like getting your air back. Like you kind of you get your wind back, because again, the whole movie feels like you're racing a clock, and there's tension, there's anxiety, and the end of that movie is very, very, very scary. Especially with the close-in dialogue. You know, we thought we'd start a chain reaction that would bring about the end of the world, and he goes, "And what of it?" And he goes, "I think we did." And you see the imagery of the rain hitting the lake, and you see the puddles, and they look as if you were in space looking at many nuclear weapons going off on the planet. And he's witnessing this, and you see the whole planet become engulfed in flames, and it's scary, because there is a bit of an understanding that, you know, the world is full of these weapons, and you know, the idea of that happening is terrifying, and Nolan captured it so well. And I remember walking out of the movies thinking, you know, like you mentioned, this is a movie that is heavy on dialogue, and we were all hanging on every single word, because the actors were just crushing it, and the story was so engaging, and the theme of the film itself was engaging. Again, we're talking about the man who had a hand in creating, you know, the atomic bomb, and we know what it's done. Like, we know the history of this thing, but now we're getting an inside perspective of the man behind it, and it's very thought-provoking, because again, the movie tackles the idea of like, oh, when did you start to feel, you know, this change of heart? When did you start to feel these human emotions where it was like, oh, this is the wrong thing to do, you had no problem building it, you had no problem doing this, you had no problem doing that? So there's a lot of great conversations, and I've actually seen it. Like, I've seen people online talk about the movie and go, yeah, I don't really understand why he felt bad, he built the thing, you know what I mean? And like, it's a great discussion piece. But I remember walking out of this, and you know, this was, it could have been recency bias, but time has passed. So, but I remember at the time I walked out and go, man, this might be Nolan's best work to date. Like, when I walked out of the theater, because again, when something's that fresh in your mind, you can't help but just go a million miles a minute. And I was like, I think this might be it, man. This felt like everything Nolan ever wanted to do in a film. You know, he had no handcuffs. You could tell that they were like, just make your movie, man. Again, we saw things we had not seen from him before. We had scenes of intimacy that we have not seen before. They worked within the concept of the movie. We had scenes of intimacy that were very uncomfortable. We had a great tension. We had great building. We had great score. We had great sound design. Everything about this movie made me think, wow, like, wow, this might be Nolan's magnum opus. Like, this might be the one, you know. And this is coming from a guy, as you know, who loves Nolan films. You know, I would argue till blue in the face that Interstellar is my favorite Christopher Nolan film. But when I walked out of this, I was like, this might be the Nolan movie in terms of like just scale and everything else. But I was absolutely just blown away by it, and I'm reminded how special that experience was when we talk about it, to see it in a theater. And it's another reminder of why Nolan and many other directors make movies for the cinema, and this is no different. And usually someone will tell you, ah, if I want to go to the movies, I need to see, you know, crazy special effects and this and that. This is a movie that relies heavily on dialogue, and somehow the movie still feels epic. Like, this movie feels epic, and it's just a movie majority dialogue, just really engaging characters, really engaging work, and you can tell the passion that went into this because of how well it played off. I could praise this movie for hours, but initially walked out thinking this movie was terrifying, and I wasn't expecting it to be as scary as it was, and I still get haunted by it when I think about some of the aspects of this film when I'm not even watching it.
Yeah, for me, it was just kind of like, man, Nolan just he does originals well.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a biopic, but at the same token, it wasn't based on a book. It wasn't based on anything else, you know. It's an original.
Mhm.
And it was just like, man, he did it again, but he did it without it being an action movie. He did it
Yeah.
without relying on the science fiction genre. There were some great visuals, but he did it based upon just how interesting he made all of these conversations feel. And we had a lot of trademark Nolan moments, with his hard cuts, with the silences, with the out of order storytelling.
Yes.
There was a lot of trademark Nolan um, uh, Nolan methods, but it still worked out to the point that audiences responded. When Universal, they knew what they were doing when they got him. He
Mhm.
had a falling out with Warner Brothers, and they knew what they were going to get when he went over there. Apparently, the budget. Let me make sure I'm reading this right because, this is according to Wikipedia. The budget was $100 million,
Crazy,
and Oppenheimer went on to make 959 million um,
bro.
dollars. So, um, to put things into perspective, Barbie was the biggest blockbuster of the year at
Mhm.
$1.44 billion. So, an IP property, an Origin IP property, but an IP property nonetheless. Super Mario Brothers, another IP property, 1.36 billion. Oppenheimer ended up being the number 3 movie of the year, and
Yeah.
that's at 959 million. So it didn't quite hit a billion, but not bad for $100 million.
No.
And an insane cast, which we will get to. That means a lot of these people did this for a fraction of their rate
Yep.
because they
Yep.
wanted to be in a Nolan movie because it's his name just makes things more interesting. You mentioned Rami Malek. He didn't talk for the entire movie until this one scene, but you
Nope.
know what? And this man already won an Oscar, so it's not like he needed
Yeah.
the credentials or anything. He's like, no, I want to work with Christopher Nolan. Here I am. And Nolan just made it work to the point that just word of mouth, and don't get me wrong, Barbie did amazing, and I gotta look at the numbers again, but they were neck and neck, but it was
Mhm.
almost like Oppenheimer was a slow build toward this box
Yes.
office, whereas Barbie made all of its money early on.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, 100 million price tag when you have A-list actors on here. Robert Downey Jr. alone is making bank. So the fact that you got RDJ with a lot of these A-list actors and your budget is 100 million, like you mentioned, they all took this for a fraction. Everybody wants to work with them. I remember reading an interview with Florence Pugh where she mentioned that Nolan and her were communicating about the film and he wanted her to be in it, and he like kind of apologized to her, says, hey, the part's not that big, and she was like, are you kidding me? Like, it could be just one scene. Let's go. Like, everybody wants to work with Nolan, and we've seen it before. We've seen big name actors work with Nolan or other directors they really want to work with for the fraction of what they're usually paid because they just want to work with Nolan as a director. So it's no surprise. I read an interview with Matt Damon that Matt Damon was thinking about taking time off from acting for a little bit. He wanted to stay home, take time, and he said the only way you'll get me out my house is if Christopher Nolan calls. And Christopher Nolan called and he went. And that just goes to show you, you know what I mean? Like the pull that Nolan has. And look, when we can't sneeze at the fact too that this movie made over $900 million on $100 million budget, and it was rated R. We talk about this all the time. Studios are very worried about R-rated pictures pulling in box office, and we get
Right.
surprises, right? Joker was one of those movies, radar pulled it in, and you're like, okay, well, Joker's a major IP. We can hang on that. Oppenheimer is not somebody people are just walking down the street to be like, hey, did you catch that new Oppenheimer comic book? Did you catch that new Oppenheimer show? Did you catch? No,
No.
this movie made all that money being rated R, biopic, on people just having discussions. There's something to say about that. It's great to see a movie like this make that kind of money at the box office.
Yeah, and also just with the Barbenheimer experience, I thought that
Yeah,
was great too. Let's just touch on
yeah,
that again. Like, people were like, no, some people said they were going to watch one and not the other,
mhm,
but it was almost like it was just a cinematic moment, just a
yes,
snapshot in time where people were just like, no, I want to come back I want to go and see both of these. I want to experience these in the movie theater. Um,
yes,
it was a great moment. You and I both saw them opening weekend, and and we both chose separate days to see it as well.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did that as well because I needed time to reflect on Oppenheimer. I needed time to reflect on Barbie, and I also liked how both casts and crews and directors were just praising one another. You know, they
Yes, they were
both gave
taking pictures in front of the other studio. It was great. It was
yeah,
so
they
great.
both showed each other love. It's like, hey, we're probably gonna end up owning the summer, but let's just make the most of this, you know. So
Yeah.
um it's such a great moment, and I'm just not gonna forget that anytime soon.
It
Let's take a
was
look.
it
Yep.
was really, really special because I remember seeing photos of cast members from the movie standing in front of Oppenheimer with tickets, in front of Barbie with tickets, and it was really cool because I think they understood how special making this event was for the cinema. Again, everything that happened over the past few years, the theaters got hit really, really, really hard. Studios were very worried and nervous about releasing certain pictures. There was massive delays, there was massive movements, and now for the first time in a long time, you have a movie event that's happening on an opening weekend, and it's not just one movie. Like, it's not people going, oh, we've got to go see the new Spider-Man movie, oh, we've got to go see the new Batman movie. It was like, no, this is a dual event. There were two movies at the box office that were drastically different in nature, tone, and theme, and everyone was excited to see both. Again, you had a couple people like, I kind of want to see one, not the other, but it was an event, and like you said, it will stand the test of time. That whenever we think about Barbie, we will think about Oppenheimer. If we think about Oppenheimer, we would think about Barbie because we would think about Barbenheimer. And that in itself is awesome. People go, oh, I remember when the last Lord of the Rings came out. I remember seeing the last Avengers movie. People are going to remember the Barbenheimer weekend, and that is awesome.
So this is the part where we normally take a look at the Oscars.
Mhm.
And once again, as of this recording, it's towards the end of February of 2024, and the Oscars haven't happened yet. So, but we can still discuss the Oscar nominations here for Oppenheimer. And it was very evident once we saw this, like this is going to get nominated for a few
Yes.
Oscars. I didn't expect this many though. 13 Oscars as
Woo!
far as the nominations go. A lot of technical. We have best sound. We have best
Yes.
production design, best original score, best makeup and hairstyling, best film editing, best costume design, best cinematography. We have actress in a supporting role, Emily Blunt. We have actor in a supporting role, Robert Downey Jr. We have actor in a leading role, Cillian Murphy. We have best adapted screenplay for Christopher Nolan, best director for Christopher Nolan, and of course, best picture for
Yes.
Christopher Nolan and company. So, um, let's take a look at. I mean, I don't want to make this be a whole Oscar thing, but they're saying Cillian Murphy is expected to win. He's a front runner to win this. It would be his
Mhm.
first win. Robert Downey Jr. is expected to win.
Oh,
It
yeah.
would,
That's my pick.
yeah,
RDJ is my
it would
pick.
be his first win. Uh, you know, a lot of the other technical ones, they're saying, you know, they might win. The biggest ones though that are talked about here is Nolan finally getting his best director Oscar and his
Mhm.
best picture Oscar. Those are the two people are looking at. More so the best director one because
Yeah.
I think it's his first nomination, if I'm not mistaken, for best director. He's gotten
Mhm.
best picture nominations and he gets credit as a producer. That's how that happens. But
Mhm.
you know, it's like what a way to make a statement that to give it to him on his first nomination for best director, which you and I both know he should have won that a long time ago.
Yes. Yes.
And you know, if he this is I mean bold statement here, maybe not a bold statement. If he had been nominated, if The Dark Knight had been nominated for best picture, there's a strong chance it would have won.
I can
And
see that.
you know, I think Inception was nominated, but we didn't see it winning there. Dunkirk was nominated, and there was a chance that
Yeah.
could have won. But out of everything, it's like, okay, it's finally time, you know?
Yeah. I would be thrilled. We're dealing with another situation. I remember years and years ago, everybody was rooting for Leonardo DiCaprio. They were like, every year, man, he gets close. Every year he gets close. I feel like it's very similar where the audience and fans alike have really understood how great a filmmaker Nolan is, and they feel like he hasn't been given that yet. They're like, how is this man not gotten best picture yet, or best director, I should say? And when we had this conversation off the air too, like this was this looks like this might be the one. Now, obviously, anything can happen. We've seen crazy things happen at the Oscars before, but if he gets it for Oppenheimer, I don't feel like this is one of those. Well, we just had to give it to him because it's been so long. I'm like, no, Oppenheimer is that good. Like, there's some technical awards there as well. Like, I love the sound design of the film. I love the score of the film. So if they get those technical awards, I'd be really happy and thrilled about. But the big ones, obviously, best director and best film. I have to still watch all the films for the best film, best picture. I gotta. There's some more I have to see, but walking out of this one, that's why I called it. This might be his magnum opus. I can totally see this getting a best picture win. I can see him finally getting a best director win. And I hopefully so, man. Hopefully so.
So the year he did get nominated for best director for
Mhm.
Dunkirk. So that's his only
Okay,
time getting nominated best director, and he was nominated for best picture as well.
good.
That was the year that Guillermo del Toro won best director and best picture for The Shape of Water.
Yeah, I
So
remember that.
so okay, at least he gave it to del Toro, so it's
I
okay.
remember that.
I
Yeah,
mean, I'm a
that
little
was a big
upset.
win.
I'm upset Nolan didn't win, but that was a great night for genre
That was a big,
movies
yeah, that was
and
a
for
very big
practical
win for Del. Yep.
effects. So um, that's as far as that goes. Let's take a look at the cast and
Whew.
give them some love here.
So the cast is just everybody. That
Yes,
is, it's just
starring Hollywood. The end.
everybody.
I'll just try to highlight some folks here. Obviously, we have Cillian Murphy as J. Robert Oppenheimer. We have Emily Blunt as Catherine Kitty Oppenheimer. We have Matt Damon as General Leslie Groves. Robert Downey Jr. as Admiral Louis Strauss. We have Florence Pugh as Jean Tatlock. We have Josh Hartnett as Ernest Lawrence. Casey Affleck as Boris Pash. We have Rami Malek as David L. Hill. Kenneth Branagh as Niels Bohr. We have director Benny Safdie, sometimes actor, as
Yes.
Edward
Yes.
Teller. We have Jason Clarke as Roger Robb. We have, I'm trying to get to just the names here. We have Dylan Arnold as Frank Oppenheimer. Tom Conti as Albert Einstein. I want to give a shout out to him. He was the man in
Mhm.
The Dark Knight Rises that kind of
Yep.
coached Bruce Wayne back to health after he got his back, quote unquote, injured or broken by Bane. So that was great. We have David Dastmalchian as William L. Borden, a lawyer and executive director of the JCAE. So you guys can IMDb Dastmalchian. This is a reunion between Nolan and Dastmalchian. He played Thomas Schiff in The Dark Knight. So
Yeah. Yep.
he's gotten so much work since The Dark Knight, which is awesome. We love seeing him.
I
And
love it. Yeah, he's one of those actors
yeah,
that I'm so happy when I see him show up. I'm just so happy, whether it's a big role or a small role. I don't know what it is, but I'm genuinely happy when I see that guy get good work.
I would venture to say he's a character actor because he's
Yeah,
played
yeah.
so many different roles over the years. He's done so many superhero roles. We've
Mhm.
seen him on TV. Like it's great seeing him. We have Dane DeHaan as Major General Kenneth Nichols, a U.S. Army officer and the deputy district engineer of the Manhattan Project. Um, we have Alden Einer. Well, I can't pronounce that last name. Ehrenreich as a Senate aide to Louis Strauss. He is a fictional character who is an aide during Strauss's nomination for the United States Secretary of Commerce. So that's who that is there. Let me see who else I can give a shout out here to. We have Matthew Modine as Vannevar Bush, head of the Office of Scientific Research and Development. We have Scott Grimes as counsel to Louis Strauss. Oh, where's he at? I want to give a shout out to one person in particular. We have Matthias. I can't pronounce his last name,
I love
but
Matthias.
Matthias as Werner Heisenberg.
Yes,
Your
love
boy
that guy.
from Army of the Dead and Army of Thieves. So,
I love that dude. I think
um,
he's so great. I think he's so great.
and obviously, oh yeah, we have Josh Peck
Jo-
as
Josh
Kenneth.
Peck,
Yeah,
man.
as Kenneth Bainbridge, a physicist who was the director of the Manhattan Project's Trinity nuclear test. We have Jack Quaid as Richard Fenneman. a theoretical physicist who worked in the theoretical division at Los Alamos. Um, who else? There's one more.
Did you mention Josh Hartnett as Ernest Lawrence?
I did.
Okay, good, because
I did
I
mention it.
love Josh Hartnett in this
Yeah,
movie.
we have Hartnett, and then Gary Oldman as Harry S. Truman.
Yes,
So,
yes.
um, and there's a ton more people to name, but those are just names you may or may not recognize.
There's so many people in this movie, man.
I remember when the cast was announced, and we just found out just this actor's attached, this actor's attached, because
Yep.
this happens for a lot of movies. But whenever Nolan movies get announced, it's news when an
Yeah.
actor gets attached, and there's like this collage that you
Yep.
see that was just this, these are the actors expected to be in Oppenheimer. And it was just kind of like, oh wow, okay, so we're having a lot of people here. I don't know how this is going to happen, but
Yep.
we're here for it, you know?
Yeah, because traditionally you have a lot of actors in here that are very well known, and usually the roles that they're playing in this movie, for any other director, they would probably be played by actors that aren't as well known, because they're not significant roles in the movie. They're very small roles. Some of these roles, again, in this movie, where you have someone like well, God, what was his name? Oh, we just mentioned him. He was in The Boys. He plays Huey in The Boys.
Oh,
What was his
Jack
real name?
Quaid.
Jack Quaid, thank you. Jack Quaid, right? You have Jack Quaid in this movie, and I'm like, oh, look, Jack Quaid is there. And he's in the movie, but he's not like a major significant role. And there's a lot of that in the movie. Again, Josh Peck, a lot of these characters, Matthias, a lot of these people, just you can tell that their agent is like, hey, no one's got a new picture out. You want to be in this? And they're like, yes, get me in this. It doesn't matter how big or small the role is. And that, again, goes to the power of Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker and as a director, is that a lot of these roles where we're seeing these big name actors, we would traditionally see actors that we're maybe not too familiar with, maybe up and comers, maybe actors that we've never seen in the picture before. Because again, these roles aren't necessarily lead characters or really significant characters. They're mainly in background, maybe a few lines here and there to push the plot forward, and that's really it. But it goes to show you just that everybody wants to work with this man. Everybody. And like you said, I remember seeing the collage and seeing all these actors and thinking, these are like legitimate A-list actors. We've got Oscar nominees. We've got Oscar winners. We've got amazing performances from all these actors on here. How do you fit all these actors on in one movie? How do you do it? And then you watch the movie and you're like, oh, okay. They're just spread everywhere. Like they're throughout this entire movie. And it's great that, all these actors are just like, no, we just want to work with Nolan.
So upon my first watch, I raved about Florence Pugh. And I will
Mhm.
admit that it was probably recency bias because she's such a scene stealer
Yes.
when she's in, when she has a supporting role, she steals scenes. And
Mhm.
she has such an energy that she brings that I thought she would get recognized more than Emily Blunt's Kitty. And looking back now, I'm glad to see Emily Blunt getting the recognition she deserves for this role and all the nominations that she's gotten. And I didn't see how many wins she's gotten, during award season, but that's great that Emily Blunt is getting this Oscar nomination. Um, I think Florence Pugh already got got some recognition before this.
Oh
So
yeah.
um it's great to see that. And um obviously just on the first watch, you just knew Robert Downey Jr. was going to make some noise come award
Yep.
season. Like he was probably the strongest role in the entire movie. It's a toss up between him and Emily Blunt.
Yeah.
Like just
Yeah.
him and Emily Blunt just owning every scene that they're in. But for me, he's the stand up performance out of everybody in the entire movie.
Yeah, I remember walking out of the theater thinking Emily Blunt was going to get nominated. I'm like, Emily Blunt's getting a Best Supporting Actress nomination. I see that coming, and RDJ as well, because RDJ, for many people, when you see Robert Downey Jr., you can't help for a lot of the audience. They see Iron Man, like that's what he's been known for. He hasn't really done too many things outside of the Marvel Cinematic Universes as of late that made people go like, yes, yes, yes. Now he's a fantastic actor. Even when the movies that have come out post Iron Man, where people are like, it doesn't really hit as well, I'm like, yeah, but his performance is fantastic. When I think about movies like The Judge, I think RDJ's performance is brilliant in it. But watching him here, I think this movie reminded a lot of people just how good he really is. And it was great to see him in a role where you completely forget about him as Iron Man. You forget about those movies, and not meant to diss those movies, but we now see this performance, individually. We just see this, and RDJ was so good in this film. Absolutely, that like he was that other name that when we walked out of the theater, we're like, he's definitely getting Best Supporting Actor nomination. And at this point, if you're asking me, I think he's got it in the bag. I think RDJ is going to win Best Supporting Actor again. Could be completely wrong. I've been wrong before, but just absolutely magnificent. Like you said, Miss Florence Pugh, she steals scenes, man. Like she's not. Again, when I read that, Nolan was like, it's not really a big role, and she's like, "Are you kidding me? Like, let's do this." It doesn't have to be a big role. It doesn't have to, and she proves that. Like she proves it that it doesn't have to be a big role. You could still steal scenes. You can still give a magnificent performance. We're talking about a 3-hour movie. She's probably collectively in it less than 10 minutes, and it doesn't matter because she's that powerful on screen, and it's great. She's got great. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is just her and Cillian Murphy's character talking to each other on chairs. Like Oppenheimer's on a chair and she's on a chair, and they're just having a dialogue. That's it. But you could just feel it. And it also says something because in the scene, they're both completely nude, and you're not distracted by that. You're just watching this performance where someone else might be like, oh my God, like, are they really nude right now? You're not even paying attention to that. And that's hard to do because Florence is very beautiful. And it's just like, no, like she's giving a very, very raw performance. Very good. The whole cast does a great job. And I was pleasantly surprised to see people like Josh Hartnett show up, who I haven't seen in a while,
Yeah.
just absolutely do a great job, kind of breaking, a typecast, if you will, playing the scientist and very well spoken and whatnot. And, just great. And seeing him with the glasses. And I was like, man, this is a good look for Josh Hartnett. I like this. But yeah, I think RDJ is a huge standout, and Emily Blunt as well.
Yeah. So we have Florence Pugh. She was nominated for Little Women, so that's her
Mhm.
only Oscar nomination. This is Emily Blunt's first Oscar nomination.
Yeah.
This is also Cillian Murphy's first Oscar
Yep.
nomination. Um, and he's the surprise. That's a lot of people were saying they didn't expect him to start getting attention during award season. But if your movie's getting a lot of attention with all these other categories, chances are you as the lead, you're going to get attention as well.
Yep.
So Robert Downey Jr. He's had 3 Oscar nominations: one for Chaplin, one for Tropic Thunder,
Yes.
and this would be his third, Oppenheimer. And um, we'll come back to this. Maybe we'll have an Oscars wrap up. A reflection on the Oscars, but it'll be really interesting to see the categories and what'll happen. That night. Will Oppenheimer sweep? There's a chance it could sweep.
Yeah.
I
It's
don't think
got
that'll
13.
happen. But there's a chance that it can have a lot of wins. And everyone's going to be looking towards those actor nominations, and
Mhm.
especially that director and Best Picture for Nolan. So we'll see as far as that goes. We're going to give some closing thoughts here, and I wanted to pose a question that we can both answer here. And the question is this year Nolan's year? Is it finally his year? And will this Oscar win cement Nolan as an all-time great director, or was he already there? So for me, whether he wins or not, he's already there.
Yeah.
That's my opinion, because box office and critically, this man has brought it for every single movie he's done since his first major studio movie, Memento. The only one where we can say things were kind of shaky was because he released Tenet during the pandemic.
Mhm.
So that's the only one where we'll never know because it wasn't released during a regular studio year. But
Yeah.
I believe his filmography stands and speaks for itself. Um, Regardless if he wins or not, I believe his legacy is already cemented as one of the greatest directors of all time, um, and one of the greatest directors of the modern era. But I think the wins in the public's eye, as a fan, he's already there for me. But I think these wins, I think it'll pretty much be a wrap, as
Yeah.
far as the public is considered. So
Yeah, I agree. I think that Nolan has definitely shown enough work through his career that for me as well, whether he wins the Oscar or not, I think he's already on that level. I think that there is a certain type of expectation when it comes to Christopher Nolan now. I think that, as I mentioned in the past, personally, I don't need to know any information outside that of it being a Nolan film, and I'm in. You don't have to show me a trailer. You don't have to show me a poster. You're like, Christopher Nolan is releasing a movie, I'm in, because the slogan in Nolan we trust. It's meant to be fun, but that's the reality of it. Is I trust him in every sense when it comes to filmmaking. Doesn't matter what it is. If he decides tomorrow to make a horror movie, I'm in. If he decides to do more IP, I'm in. If he does more sci-fi, I'm in. Biopics, I'm in. So I think that him getting an Oscar win is kind of like that acknowledgement from the Academy. It's just that acknowledgement, like, yes, yes, we see you. Like you said, the public perception is like, yeah, man, he got the Oscar. He finally got it. He's now one of the elites. He's one of the greatest of all time. But like you mentioned, I think he's already there. I think he's one of those directors that over time has just built up and built up and built up. And somehow I always walk away from his pictures thinking, man, he's just like, he constantly surprises me. Whether I enjoyed a previous work more or not, like if I could walk out of Interstellar and then watch Oppenheimer or Batman Begins or The Dark Knight or any of his films and go, well, I like this one more than the other. I like this one more than the other. Well, I like this one not as much as the other one. I'll always walk away with a new experience of like, man, like there's just something about his filmmaking and his presence on film that you can't help but acknowledge as one of the greats. There's a lot of great directors in the world right now. We're seeing a lot of great directors really come up. We talked about them. And there's a lot of great directors from the past, but Nolan is one of those guys, man. He's just one of those directors that you can't help but feel he's already one of the GOATs. We're not the only ones that say it. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people in the public that say, yeah, he's one of the greatest of all time, period. So do I want him to get it? Absolutely. Do I think it's his year? I do. I do think it's his year. Again, I've been wrong before. I've been wrong
Right.
plenty of times when it comes to the Oscars. I do think it's his year. I think that this is the one. I think that this is his magnum opus. I think this is one of those movies that I saw people very hesitant before release. People that had loved Nolan were like, oh man, I don't know if I'm going to be into this movie. I'm not entirely sure. It's just, I don't know. And everyone walked out being like, no, that was mind blowing. You know what I mean? So he's got great box office. He's got great critical reception. He's got great fan reception. I think Nolan is already on that status. Do I want him to win it? Yes. Do I think it's his year? Yes. Does he need it to be on that level, in my opinion? No, he's already there.
Yeah. And there's speculation that Warner Brothers wants him back. And it's not like he signed an exclusive deal with Universal that he can't leave, but obviously him and Universal have a great relationship now because of,
Yep.
because of this. And maybe because Universal just let him do his thing, that now he's finally going to get recognized, um, and let me be clear here. A lot of these artists, they don't need this because they're already doing the thing that they love. But
Yeah.
the Oscar is the pinnacle of recognition in the industry. So to get that, it would mean something to him in the sense of, I did this here with Universal that I couldn't do with you guys, and
Yeah.
it may or may not have been Warner's fault. Who knows? But with the way they had the falling out after Tenet, it was just kind of like, all right, well, it's time to change things up. Maybe he goes back to Warner Brothers one day and we'll see what happens,
Yeah.
but I know we will be watching and the world will be watching when the Oscars comes around. So,
Oh yeah.
all righty. Okay, folks, that was the Panel Bros official breakdown for Oppenheimer. If you could please give us a like, share, and subscribe on YouTube at the Panel Bros, we'd appreciate it. Also, if you could let us know your thoughts on Oppenheimer in the comments below, we'd appreciate that as well. How do you feel about this compared to the rest of Nolan's filmography? Is this your favorite Nolan film? How do you think it's going to do at the Oscars? Please let us know in the comments below. For Ricardo Segura, this is Anderson Marchak saying thank you for coming to the panel.